I've been rereading the book Last Day Events because I believe every time we have another evidence that Jesus' coming is near, that we can understand more. We can't just go on what we understood before, but we have to read again and see what the Holy Spirit helps us to pick up on, so that we are as prepared as we can be for the last days. So the main title, What's Ahead? And the second title, What Will Church Members Experience Soon? Now, I'm not in the business of predicting. In fact, we have been told that we're not to make people think that Jesus is coming in 5 years, and neither are we to put off his coming like it'll be 10 or 20 years. Thank you. So when I say soon, I'm using it in the Bible sense and in the sense that Ellen White uses it. She spoke even in her day of soon. So I feel completely justified to talk about Jesus coming as soon. Paul gives an interesting warning, and I really don't think that it is well understood by Seventh-day Adventists. Acts 20, verses 29 and 30. For I know this, that after my departing shall grievous wolves enter in among you, not sparing the flock. Also, of your own selves shall men arise, speaking perverse things, to draw away disciples after them. Now, were those offshoots, or were they people that were working inside the early Christian church? It appears from what he says, now they may shoot out and start an offshoot, but they're going to start out, and some of them are going to stay in the early Christian church. And because of that, it becomes very dangerous to people because they belong to the true church. And yet, he labels them as wolves that have snuck in to the church, got baptized, look like they're good converts, and yet they are in there to damage the flock. And then the other group are people that think they're really good Adventists, and they have come up with a new idea, and they think this is really important, that everybody understand this, and so they're busy promoting that. And he says, I know this is going to happen after my death. He battled it while he was alive, and when he was gone and others who could battle it the best were gone, then he knew what was going to happen. His words were actually echoing the words of Jesus when he said in Matthew 7:15, beware of false prophets which come to you in sheep's clothing. Again, are we paying attention to the fact that these are inside the church? I think the average viewpoint today is that all the bad guys are outside of the Adventist church, and that we don't really have anything to worry. Our leaders will tell us who all the bad guys are, and so we really don't have to worry about this problem. But Jesus clearly said, when they come, they're going to come in sheep's clothing. They're going to look very good on the outside, but inwardly, they are ravening wolves. In other words, they have ideas that are not scriptural, not according to the writings of Ellen White, but they believe that God has given that to them, And they're going to do their best to cause everybody to see this truth that they feel they have seen. And it could be both groups are in there. The group that's purposely come in to corrupt the faith of Adventists. Then Jesus said this, which I think should be really clear, in Mark 12, verse 38, Matthew 16, verse 6 first. Then Jesus said unto them, take heed and beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and of the Sadducees. Now here he takes a step further. He says, watch out for your leaders. Watch out. Because if you don't watch out, they're going to influence you with their leaven. And in Mark 12:38, he says, beware of the scribes. So those were the three main leaders of the Jewish nation. And Jesus warns to be careful. Now, that doesn't mean all leaders are bad. We know Nicodemus, although he lacked conversion, he became a wonderful disciple of Jesus. But what it does do is opens our eyes to the fact that not all the leaders of the Seventh-day Adventist Church are following what God said. And they can become dangerous, and they can fill us with leaven that is going to harm us. Otherwise, Jesus wouldn't have put this in there, because the Bible is written for the last days. There are other warnings. Jesus said in Matthew 24, 11 and 12, and many false prophets. Notice the word many. Many false prophets. Now, when we see that, we think of people who claim to be a prophet. But in the Old Testament, the word prophet and the word teacher were very closely connected. Prophets were usually teachers as well. And so Jesus didn't distinguish here between a prophet and a teacher. And of course, all pastors are teachers, all professors are teachers. There's lots of teachers today. And many false prophets shall rise and shall deceive many. And then here's another problem that would be faced. And because iniquity shall abound, the love of many shall wax cold. Now, the iniquity outside the Adventist church can have an influence on us if we are involved in it. You know, if we're watching it all the time and if we're doing the things that people of the world do. But I don't believe that's the primary focus of this verse. It's saying, because of the iniquity that is practiced inside the church, many people will have their relationship with Jesus grow cold. Because maybe they have friends that are like that. Maybe they see even leaders doing things they ought not to be doing and following the world. And so they lose their understanding of the importance of the Adventist message, and they become cold, and maybe they even leave the church. 2 Peter does name teachers in chapter 2, verses 1 and 2. But there were false prophets also among the people, even as there shall be false teachers among you. So as he looks backward, he talks about false prophets. As he looks forward, he talks about teachers. What will these false teachers do? Who privily shall bring in damnable heresies, even denying the Lord that bought them, and bring upon themselves swift destruction. and many shall follow their pernicious ways, by reason of whom the way of truth shall be evil spoken of. So it will be so bad that people will say, I don't want to be an Adventist because look at what Adventists do. Look at how they behave. Look at the things that they're doing. And so they get a bad attitude toward Adventists. Now, the rest of us have to live with that, even if we're not living that lifestyle. And we find that people want to reject us and think evil of us, even though we're not like that. But that's always been the way in every movement that God has established. Now, let's look a little more closely at what are these kind of things going to bring upon us as members of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. In Last Day Events 172, it says, it is a solemn statement that I make to the church that not one in 20 whose names are registered upon the church books are prepared to close their earthly history and would be as verily without God and without hope in the world as the common sinner. So they're a church member. Many think that it's okay, that I'm safe as long as I belong to the Adventist church, that I'm a church member. But here it says not even 1 in 20. I was doing some figuring. I think we have about 22 million Seventh-day Adventists. And if it's not 1 in 20, then maybe it's 1 in 30, maybe 1 in 40, 1 in 50. I figured 1 in 30, and it came out to be about 744,000 Seventh-day Adventists that do not come under this condemnation here. And I took 50, and it came out to about 400 and something thousand out of 22 million. So I don't think that people have a very good view of what the real condition of things is and the dangers that come because of the condition that things are in. Now, some might say, well, but we're a lot better off than back in those days. I doubt it. I think it's gotten worse rather than better. Also, Last Day Events 172, those who have had opportunities to hear and receive the truth and who have united with the Seventh-day Adventist Church, calling themselves the commandment-keeping people of God, and yet possess no more vitality and consecration to God than do the nominal churches, will receive of the plagues of God just as verily as the churches who oppose the law of God. So the majority of Seventh-day Adventists are no better off than those that are going to the Sunday churches. And they are destined to the same destiny unless there's a change. Now, praise God, there is the possibility of change still in this situation, because through the power of the Holy Spirit, God is well able to revive us and to make us a real Seventh-day Adventist, but we must not be drifting in the direction that this one is talking about. Knowing the truth is not sufficient to save us in the end. We have to have a heart relationship with Jesus, and we have to be willing to do what he's told us to do. If we have a heart relationship, we will not refuse any direction that he gives us. We won't refuse any change in our life that he asks us to do. But if we don't have that personal relationship with him, our heart will rise up against many things and we will not want to do them. As a result of this problem, two groups are going to develop. Now, Jesus mentioned this as well in Matthew 13, verse 30. Let both grow together until the harvest. And in the time of harvest, I will say to the reapers, gather ye together first the tares. Now, this is important. The tares are harvested first. And there's a very important result that will come because of this. Gather ye together first the tares, and bind them in bundles to burn them. But gather the wheat into my barn. So here Jesus predicts that through this parable that, he wasn't the one that planted the tares, but said the enemy came along and planted those tares, and his disciples wanted to uproot all the tares, and he said, no, you shouldn't do that, because if you've ever tried to pull up weeds that are completely mixed with what you're growing, you'll discover that you pull up the good stuff as well. And so Jesus said, no, don't pull up the tares. Leave it until the harvest, and then we'll gather the tares first. Well, this is commented on more in the writings of Ellen White. In Second Selected Messages 1:14, it says, divisions will come in the church. Two parties will be developed. So someone that is talking about complete unity all across the board in the Adventist church right now, they don't understand what they're talking about. Because what God says is that two groups, two parties will be developed. There will be a division in the church between these two parties. The wheat and the tares grow up together for the harvest. And so some will be tares, some will be wheat. And the smaller portion, apparently, from what we've studied already, are going to be wheat. And the larger portion are going to be tares. Also, Last Day Events, page 173, says the history of the rebellion of Korah. It didn't put Korah in here, but you know that Korah was involved. The rebellion of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram is being repeated and will be repeated till the close of time. So the questions are asked. What are you going to do when a Korah, Dathan, and Abiram rebellion takes place in the Adventist church? It says, who will be on the Lord's side? And the second question, who will be deceived and in their turn become deceivers? So the tares get deceived and they become deceivers of others, but those that resist the rebellion of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram, they are wheat, and they will stay true. And those are the two groups that are developed. Now, we don't need to go into what some of those are, but I'll just mention two of them that are very big. Number one is the division that has taken place over women's ordination. And large portions of the church have said, we don't care what the world church voted. We believe it's right to go ahead and ordain women and to put men out of business as pastors so we can put women in. Well, that's a Korah, Dathan, and Abiram rebellion. Another one is to preach the message that we cannot fully overcome sin through the power of Christ. Now, in our own strength, yes, we cannot overcome all sin. And that's why some people are getting discouraged. They've been trying in their own strength, and they can't seem to do it. So they come to the conclusion it can't be done. In fact, there are whole sections of the Adventist church where you will be in trouble if you preach victory over sin. Those are just two, but there's other Korah, Dathan, and Abiram rebellions, and it says that they existed in Ellen White's day, and it's probably addressing the 1888 rebellion by even the General Conference president, as well as Uriah Smith and some others. But fortunately, Uriah Smith repented later on. So it says that's going to keep on going till the end of time. We don't need to leave the Adventist church over it. We don't need to get discouraged about it. We just need to become more faithful in doing what God has asked us to do. Now, how many Adventists are going to leave? Now, this is important. There are two ideas today that are being presented. I talked to somebody this week, and they basically said the church is hopeless, it's too far off the track, and so it's going to crash. I said, no, it's not. And I'm going to draw your attention to the way these statements are spoken. It says in 6 Testimonies 3:32, the Lord will not excuse those who know the truth if they do not in word and deed obey his commands. We have all the information available. We can know what we're supposed to do. If we don't do what we're supposed to do, the Lord is not able to excuse us because we have plenty of light. Second selected message is 368. When the law of God is made void, the church will be sifted by fiery trials. Now, it doesn't say what those fiery trials are, but I guess from what Jesus said, which I couldn't put that in here, that we will be persecuted by our own brethren as one of the fiery trials, persecuted by our own family sometimes. Fiery trials. And a larger portion than we now anticipate will give heed to seducing spirits and doctrines of devils. So it's hard for us to imagine how big this is going to become. But the words that are used, the larger portion, more than 50% of the church, the larger proportion. And 6 Testimonies 400, as trials thicken around us, both separation and unity will be seen in our ranks. So here we have those two groups again, and the group that is the wheat, they are getting closer and closer together. They are unifying with each other, but there is no way they can unify with the other group because they're traveling a different path. And so instead of teaching that we're going to all get unified, we're not. It's going to separate more and more. These two groups are going to have to pull apart. It's not the first time it's happened. If you trace history back to not long after Adam and Eve's time, you find that it wasn't long until the ones that were godly, they had to live separate from the others. And they lived in the mountains and enjoyed, the country. But the others moved to the city. And so this separation and unity keeps on happening. It happened under the Millerite movement. They tried to stay in those churches, but they just weren't able to unify with them. And so the same will be seen in the last days. In 1 Testimonies 181, it says, I asked the meaning of the shaking I had seen, and was shown that it would be caused by the straight testimony called forth by the council of the true witness to the Laodiceans. Now, again, what is the straight testimony? Well, certainly, the Laodicean message has a straight testimony in it. It says your Christian experience is not real. You have big problems in your Christian experience. And here's the solution to it. But I don't believe that's all of what it is under the category of straight testimony. This will have its effect upon the heart of the receiver and will lead him to exalt. Notice what they're going to exalt: the standard, and pour forth the straight truth. Some will not bear this straight testimony. They will rise up against it, and this will cause a shaking among God's people. So, yes, it's the straight truth about their spiritual condition, but it's also the straight truth about the standard that we are to be carrying, and the whole truth that is supposed to be preached in the last days. In Counsels to Teachers 251, it says, one night I was awakened and instructed to write a straight testimony regarding the work of our school at Loma Linda. By that school, a solemn sacred work is to be done. So this is not talking so much about their Christian walk with Jesus, but other matters have gotten off the track at Loma Linda. And so the Lord gave Ellen White a straight testimony for the leaders of Loma Linda. Also in Counsels to Teachers, page 101, in our schools in Battle Creek, Hillsburg, and Currumbong, I have borne a straight testimony concerning these matters. There were those who thought the restraint too severe. Now that's specifically talking about courtship and dating and so on that should not go on. But other straight testimonies were given as well. When they were playing games, they got a straight testimony as well. They didn't like it very well, and one person said, well, Sister White, if you know so much about running a school, why don't you come over here and run this school? Another teacher said, I don't think you should be talking to Sister White that way. But, the straight testimony is going to be born in the last days. Gospel Workers 307. The Lord calls for a renewal of the straight testimony born in years past. He calls for a renewal of spiritual life. I've been reading through the testimonies backward from 9 back to 1. And what I've noticed is that in book number 4, there is a real straight testimony. In the later books, yes, things are pointed out, but it's not the same. It's not as pointed. And I think this is what it's talking about, that we're going to have to get back to the way the gift of prophecy worked in the beginning and listen to the counsel that was given in the beginning. In the third selected messages, 84, one thing is certain: those Seventh-day Adventists who take their stand under Satan's banner will first give up their faith in the warnings and reproofs contained in the testimonies of God's Spirit. So, step number 1 of getting in trouble is turning away from the counsel that was given to us through Ellen White. Now, I do think that things have gotten so much worse that, and God is very merciful, I think that there's a lot of people who don't think her writings are important because they've been told by leaders that they're not important. And the emphasis has been that, the conflict series is good, Steps to Christ is good, but when you get to the books that are specific, like Counsels on Diets and Foods, or some of the other, very pointed messages on various habits of life, they indicate to their members that those things have to be looked at in light of our modern society, and you can't just take them as they read. I think God is going to be merciful to the people that never got 100% confidence in Ellen White's writings. So we need to be careful not to condemn them because of that. This is specifically saying the people that once had confidence in Ellen White's writings, but they gave it up, they're the ones that have taken the first step out of being among the wheat. And there are other steps that they take after that, and eventually they even give up the Bible as well, or at least portions of the Bible. So it says one thing is certain. This is what will happen in the last days. Third selected message is 83. Those who have been preparing the way for the people to pay no heed to the warnings and reproofs of the testimonies of the Spirit of God will see that a tide of errors of all kinds will spring into life. Now, if you look at that one closely, the idea that Ellen White's writings are not necessary, that we can get everything we need out of the Bible, is a deception in itself. It says here that those who are preparing the people to pay no heed to the warnings and reproofs are going to see a lot of errors come in. Why? Because those errors could have been kept out if they had given people confidence in the writings of Ellen White. Now, it is true that Ellen White makes a statement about we wouldn't have needed the Bible, but if you look at the whole picture of what she says, she's not saying what most people think she was in that. You have to find an interpretation that doesn't disagree with references like these, and there's quite a few of references like this. Fifth testimony, 676. The plain, straight testimony must live in the church. We can't have the latter rain. We can't close up Earth's history until the straight testimony is given. And it is to be given to separate the two groups of people from each other. And it's to find out who is willing to follow what God has said and who isn't. The plain, straight testimony must live in the church, or the curse of God will rest upon his people as surely as it did upon ancient Israel because of their sins. Wow, that's a pretty serious statement. The curse of God. So those of us that are willing to take the straight testimony, no matter how much it steps on our toes, or no matter how much it tells us is wrong about ourselves, that will save. Just like 10 righteous people could have saved Sodom. 10 righteous people can save the Adventist church as well. But they have to be willing to listen to the straight testimony. Now, who are the ones that go out? And notice again, the church is not going to crash. Now, it is true, both in the Bible and in the writings of Ellen White, there are two churches mentioned. One church is the faithful souls. And that church was started by Adam and Eve, and every faithful soul that has had a heart relationship and been willing to do what God said, they became a member of that church. And every Seventh-day Adventist that is faithful and doing what God has asked us to do is a part of that church. Then the other church is the organization that God has established. And some are teaching that this organization is so far off the track that God is going to scrap it and just use the faithful souls. But if you'll notice, the quotations we're going to read, that is not what is being said. Prophets and Kings, page 188. Many a star that we have admired for its brilliance will then go out in darkness. Now, eventually, they'll leave the church, but they may stay in for quite a while before they go out. But notice the word many, and obviously, these are looked at as godly people because they've been admired for the brilliance of their abilities in the church. And it says many of them will go out. Also in Review and Herald of September 11, 1888, and this would indicate they were right in the middle of this happening. Frequent will be the apostasies of men who have occupied responsible positions. Notice the word frequent. Apostasies of men who have had responsible positions. Now, I don't think we should get involved in a witch hunt and try to figure out who they are. But if we hear teaching that is not according to the Word of God, we need to beware. Last day events, 179. Many will stand in our pulpits with the torch of false prophecy in their hands, kindled from the hellish torch of Satan. So this indicates many pastors and others who preach will be preaching false prophecy, especially Sunday keeping is one of them, but there no doubt are other things. And seventh manuscript release, 192, ministers and doctors may depart from the faith. As the word declares, they will. So in that word doctor, I don't think it's only talking about medical doctors, but PhDs. So ministers, theologians, professors, ministers and doctors may depart from the faith as the word declares they will, and as the messages that God has given his servant declare they will. So, two sources. The Bible says this will happen. God revealed through Ellen White this will happen. And so we must be prepared by knowing ahead of time what we are facing ahead of us. And it's not all ahead of us. Some of it is going on right now. And we must be prepared, not to get discouraged, not to give up, but to realize that God is going to sift them out. A little more on how many leave. Great Controversy, 608. As the storm approaches, a large class who have professed faith in the third angel's message, but have not been sanctified through obedience to the truth, abandon their position and join the ranks of the opposition. So here we're getting down to the battle over the Sunday law, and the people who are on the wrong side, the tares, are going to find it hard to stay in the Adventist church. And they're going to leave the Adventist church. They're going to think that the wheat has gone crazy and that they are ridiculous in their positions, and so they're better off with the opposition. 5th Testimonies 1:36. Soon God's people will be tested by fiery trials. There's that one again. And the great proportion of those who now appear to be genuine and true will prove to be base metal. So there again, it's more than 50%, great proportion. 4th Testimonies 89, the shaking of God blows away multitudes like dry leaves. 5th Testimonies 81, chaff like a cloud will be borne away on the wind, even from places where we see only floors of rich wheat. You know, I was thinking, where is it that Seventh-day Adventists believe they have rich, where they see floors of rich wheat? Wouldn't it be in our Jerusalem centers? Now, a Jerusalem center is a place where you can live and you can send your children to grade school, to academy, and to college and university, and you don't have to move anywhere. That's where we look, to be places where there is floors of rich wheat. But when this great struggle comes, you know, before this, the two groups have developed, and when the storm comes, it's going to sweep, as it says here, chaff like a cloud is going to be swept away. Then I also thought about self-supporting work. You know, an awful lot of people in the Adventist church think that if you're a real Adventist, then you're going to live like they do at Wildwood. And so some people are looking at Wildwood as a floor of rich wheat. But we just might get surprised when this comes as to how many people that are living at Wildwood are real wheat. I don't know. I'm only just thinking about this paragraph or about this sentence. Second selected messages, 380, comes quite clear, I believe. The church may appear as about to fall. Now, could that be the Faithful Souls Church? Well, some people may think, well, it means that they get to be so few that it looks like they're going to fall. The church may appear as about to fall, but it does not fall. It remains while the sinners in Zion will be sifted out. Now, that rules out the first interpretation, doesn't it? It can't be the faithful souls, because the true souls are going to stay in, and the unfaithful souls are going to be sifted out. The chaff separated from the precious wheat. This is a terrible ordeal, but nevertheless, it must take place. Now, God doesn't want us to be discouraged when He reveals the future, but He does want us to understand, and He doesn't want us to worry that we can't handle standing up against all that. He doesn't want us to worry about that, because when the time comes, he will give us faith. What we do need to think about now is making sure our relationship with him is correct and that we are following the light that he's given us. If we are, then he will assist us through what's ahead. 5 Testimonies 1:36, when the religion of Christ is most held in contempt, when his law is most despised, then should our zeal be the warmest, and our courage and firmness the most unflinching. So the harder it gets, the more we are to press forward, to stand in defense of truth and righteousness when the majority forsake us. There it is again. The majority go out. To fight the battles of the Lord when champions are few. To continue to teach the truth when most people are criticizing you for it and condemning you for it and trying to prove that you're not right. This will be our test. At this time, we must gather warmth from the coldness of others. So instead of becoming cold because other people are cold, it is to cause us to heat up and to become more fervent and more closely attached to Jesus. Courage from their cowardice. In other words, they don't want to stand up. They just don't want to have all the trouble they would have if they stand up. And instead, God is looking for people that when they see people not stand up for what's right, they are determined to stand up. Courage from their cowardice and loyalty from their treason. Are you willing to be that kind of person in the closing up of God's work? If so, God will help you and bless you in being able to do that. Now, even though the vast majority of Seventh-day Adventists today will end up being lost, God is going to do a mighty work. And Jesus told about this in Matthew 20, verses 6 and 7. And about the 11th hour he went out and found others standing idle, and saith unto them, Why stand ye here all the day idle? They say unto him, Because no man hath hired us. He saith unto them, Go ye also into the vineyard. So here is 1 hour before closing time, and Jesus goes into the marketplace, and he finds people not preaching his message. And so he hires them. Who are these people? Well, in Last Day Events, page 182, it says, His heart of mercy is touched. His hand is still stretched out to save, while the door is closed to those who would not enter. So there comes a point when the door is closed for Seventh-day Adventists. They have already had their opportunity. They have not responded to the message that God has given them, and so the door is closed. But the other people, the door is still open for them. Large numbers will be admitted who in these last days hear the truth for the first time. Wow. For the first time, they hear the message. And as a result, many of them fill the places that were left vacant. Here's how the battle is going to go. 8 Testimonies 41. Standard after standard was left to trail in the dust, as company after company from the Lord's army joined the foe. I was thinking about, why does it say company after company? I suggest to you it's talking about church after church. You know, when we belong to a church, the other people that are in the church have a tendency to influence us either for Jesus or against him. either for reform or against reform, either to have a heart relationship with him or not have a heart relationship. And in general, now there are exceptions, but in general, the whole church becomes like each other. And so it sounds to me like it's very possible that church after church will abandon, you could even say institution, that's another company of people. Institution after institution will join the enemy, but on the other side, and tribe after tribe from the ranks of the enemy united with the commandment-keeping people of God. So church, I don't know why it said company first and then tribe, but church after church will come in, institution, maybe a number of institutions will come in, and the church will not suffer as much as it looks like it's going to suffer because of the 11th hour believers. Early Writings 271 says, their places were immediately filled by others taking hold of the truth and coming into the ranks. So the good news is there's thousands of people out there that when they hear the truth for the first time, they're going to welcome it and come in. And this is going to be a wonderful time of harvest right at the end. So let's just recount 7 reasons why members will leave, so that we will be protected against these 7 things. Now, this is not a complete list, but the 7 were in what we read. Number 1, people ultimately leave anyway, when they've been deceived by false teachers. They failed to compare what they were taught with the Bible and the writings of Ellen White. Number 2, they joined with one of the Korah, Dathan, and Abiram rebellions. And of course, these 3 men were convinced they could do a better job than what was being done by Moses. And it's easy for our corrupt human nature to want to join that kind of group, especially when we see things that ought to be different. Number 3, a failure to obey the truth. They heard the truth, but they didn't obey it. Number 4, because iniquity in the church abounds. Look around them, they see all the things that are going on that ought not to go on, and they just slide into disobedience also. 5, they give up believing the testimony of Jesus, which is the spirit of prophecy. Number 6, some give up because of fiery trials. They just don't want to have to go through all that. But one thing helps me is the wicked, in the end, will have a worse time than we will. So don't turn back because of fiery trials. They are easy compared to what the wicked are going to go through. And number 7 is persecution from outside the church, as well as the fiery trials inside the church. Those are reasons that God has pointed out why people lose their way and become a part of the tares. But as we look at what's ahead, don't you think it's the time, if we're not on fire for Jesus now, that it's time to get on fire? And it's time to be busy reading, studying, practicing what God has said. Whatever we read. I had someone send me an email this week, and they just read, or at least the text registered in their mind, where the Bible says it's a shame for a man to wear long hair. And they were asking me, is this really what it means? And so I gave them the best answer I could. But the thing that was heartwarming is if that's what the text said, he was ready to do it. You know, and how many people today are that willing when they read something to practice it? But that's what it's going to take to be a part of the wheat in the last days. Not doing it because you think you'll earn any merit with Jesus, no. But simply because Jesus has done so much for us, the least we can do is what he wants us to do. And with happiness, to do what he has told us to do.